So let's talk about the organization of muscles here. So we looked at muscle tissue in the tissue chapter. So we looked at skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle and smooth muscle. We looked at their cell types. And now we need to look at how do those cells, those muscle cells, come together to create an actual muscle, the muscle that you think about, like the biceps muscle or the quadriceps or whatever. So we know that muscle is attached to bone, and we're talking specifically about skeletal muscle here. We're focusing on that right now. So if we have a bone here, so let's put that there. The muscle is going to be attached to the bone, right? That's where it starts. It's attached to bone. And it's attached to bone through a tissue, a connective tissue, so dense, regular connective tissue that forms a tendon. And the fibers run parallel to one another like that, and they come out, that tendon comes out, and it forms an outer covering of that large muscle. So if we take this muscle and we slice it in half so we can see what's in that, and you can call it the biceps or whatever muscle that it is, but it's surrounded by this dense, regular connective tissue. And that covering that holds the whole muscle together is called the epimysium. So inside of that is the actual muscle tissue. So if we go in here, here's the muscle. And the fibers run with those fibers of the connective tissue there, right? And those muscle fibers in there, the muscle is just a bunch of muscle cells grouped together. So inside this big muscle, we have groups of muscle cells. And these groups here are called fascicles. So a fascicle is just a group of muscle cells. Okay? So basically we've got muscle cells here. Right? And if we pull out this fascicle, then we're going to see just a bunch of muscle cells. The tissue that surrounds the fascicle is also dense, regular connective tissue, and that layer that holds that fascicle together is called perimysium. So that's around here. So if we pull out a muscle cell, we also have some connective tissue that goes around that as well. And that connective tissue, we'll do that darker blue, goes around here, goes around it, and it is loose connective tissue. So the epimysium and the perimysium are dense connective tissue. The tissue that surrounds the muscle cell is called endomysium, and it is loose connective tissue, like areolar connective tissue. So this muscle cell, this is a skeletal muscle cell. Again, we are focusing on the skeletal muscle cell. It's going to have nuclei, and the nuclei, remember, this is skeletal muscle, so it's multinucleate. So its nuclei are going to be kind of pushed to the periphery of the muscle cell, kind of the outside of it. This area here, where the nuclei are, just right outside of it, is called the sarcolemma. That is the plasma membrane. The endomysium is not part of the plasma membrane. It's just a covering around it. Okay? So, a muscle cell, if you remember, a muscle cell looks kind of like this. It's a long cylindrical cell. It looks a little bit like that. It has nuclei all around it that's shoved to the periphery, and it's striated. So why are those nuclei shoved to the periphery of where the sarcolemma is, and why does it look striped? Well, your muscle cells are full of little contractile units called myofibrils. So I'm going to do this as quickly as I can and Okay, so these myofibrils are inside the muscle cell, and then it fills them up. Like your muscle cells are full of these things called myofibrils, and they are in a very organized sort of situation here. So that's what I'm trying to make it look, all like parallel and stuff. So those are the myofibrils, and those are myofibrils. So myofibrils are the contracting units of the cell. Units of a muscle cell. So the myofibrils are themselves, each one of them is a type of what we call a myofilament. Okay, so myofibrils consist of myofilaments. So these right here are myofilaments. And I've tried to draw them a little bit thicker than the green ones. Those are thick filaments. The thick filaments are also called myosin. Sorry. Spelling isn't good right now. Okay, so myosin. And myosin is the type of protein that the thick filament is made out of. The other filament, which is this one, quite the right color there. So this one here is a thin filament, and it is made out of a protein called actin. So the muscle itself starts with the tendon here, which is attached to the bone. The tendon holds the muscle cells that create the muscle. So that's the red part here. That outer covering is the epimysium. The whole muscle is made up of fascicles, which are groups of muscle cells. Each one of these fascicles is bound together by a dense connective tissue called the perimysium. Each one of the muscle cells also has a connective tissue covering, but it is loose connective tissue, and that covering is called the endomysium. Under that is the sarcolemma, or the plasma membrane of the muscle cell. The muscle cell itself is made up of myofibrils. Myofibrils are the contracting units of the muscle cell, and they come in two flavors, thick filaments and thin filaments. Okay, so these are the myofilaments of the muscle, and they are, again, separated into thick filaments and thin filaments. Thick filaments are made up of myosin, and thin filaments are made up of actin. So that's how the muscle cell is put together, and now we can talk about the specific anatomy and parts of the muscle cell that have to do with muscle contraction.